Jenna and Mark sat together on their cozy living room couch, the soft light of the lamp casting a gentle glow over the space. A thick woolen blanket was spread across their laps, the comfort of it as familiar as the rhythm of their evenings together. It was one of those rare nights when nothing interrupted their routine, no calls, no demands, just the two of them, curled up with mugs of hot chocolate. The steam rose lazily from their drinks, the rich smell of chocolate filling the air. Mark, always the restless one, reached for the TV remote. His thumb flicked through channels with practiced ease, eyes scanning the screen until he found it, the wildlife documentary he'd been waiting for all week. He smiled as the opening credits rolled. Jenna leaned back, closing her eyes for a moment, her fingers tracing the rim of her mug. For a brief second, everything seemed perfect, the warmth of the chocolate and the quiet of the evening merging into a sense of peace she rarely felt. But then, just as the first few images of giraffes grazing on the plains flashed across the screen, a voice interrupted. It was the host of a health segment, a well-groomed pediatrician speaking with an authority that seemed to fill the room. These modern baby carriers, the strollers, the walkers, many parents swear by them, but the truth is, they're doing more harm than good, the doctor said, his serious tone making Jenna sit up a little straighter. Mark's finger hovered over the remote. He was about to change the channel when Jenna, her curiosity piqued, interrupted him. Wait. Let's listen to this. I've been reading about this too. Mark, who had no interest in health trends or parenting debates, sighed softly but let the channel stay. He had a soft spot for Jenna and her sometimes obsessive research, even if it didn't always interest him. But he was itching to get back to his animals on the screen. The giraffes were still in the background, just about to sprint across the savannah. But Jenna wasn't finished. You know, she continued, I've been thinking about something. A girl from work is selling a stroller, like brand new, for almost nothing. She said her son hated it. Can you believe it? It's like a steal. Mark, still distracted by the screen, barely registered the shift in tone in her voice. He didn't even look at her as he half-heartedly muttered, stroller, huh? Yeah, we could grab it, Jenna pressed on, her words slightly more eager now. We could store it in the closet until we're ready for it. It's practically brand new, and you know how expensive those things are. Mark froze for a moment, the remote still in his hand. His eyes flicked from the screen to Jenna, who was looking at him with an expression he couldn't quite read. The TV continued to drone on in the background, the sound of the narrator's voice distant and forgotten. Mark's pulse quickened, and suddenly, the peaceful evening felt like it had just hit a bump, an uncomfortable one. Wait, why are you even thinking about a stroller? Mark asked, his voice laced with confusion and the hint of something more. He looked at her, the flicker of doubt creeping into his mind. Jenna, sensing his unease, felt a pang in her chest. She hadn't meant to catch him off guard, but her desire was coming through stronger than she intended. Mark, we've talked about this. You know we're going to need one eventually. It's not like we're going to be childless forever. Her voice wavered a little, despite her attempt to sound casual. Mark let out a soft chuckle, but it was strained. I didn't think we'd need one so soon, he said, trying to mask the rising unease in his own chest. What, are you, pregnant? He said the words lightly, but his eyes didn't quite meet hers. Jenna shook her head, a small, disappointed smile curving her lips. No, I'm not pregnant. But it's going to happen one day. Sooner or later, we'll need all this stuff, right? She leaned forward slightly, her tone shifting to something more serious. I just thought, why wait? Why not get it now while it's still a good deal? Mark's face tightened as he met her gaze, his brow furrowing. I don't understand why we're talking about this now. I thought we agreed we weren't going to rush into having kids. We've got so much to do, this is not the right time. His voice was sharper now, almost defensive. Jenna's heart sank as she heard his words. They were the same ones he'd used before, the same tired excuses that seemed to haunt their conversations about children. She didn't know why it bothered her so much tonight, but it did. She could feel her frustration bubbling up. She had waited patiently for 2 years, had hoped that their plans would evolve, that Mark would come around. But all she ever got from him was hesitation. Mark, we've been married for 2 years now. 2 years, Jenna repeated, her voice a little louder than before. And all this time, you've been against it. You've said that we're not ready. But I'm ready. I want kids, and I want them now. I can't keep waiting. Mark's face paled. He leaned back against the couch, running a hand through his hair, trying to push away the uncomfortable truth that seemed to be pressing on him from all sides. Jenna, I'm just not sure. Kids change everything. You know that, right? He paused, his eyes searching hers, looking for something that might make him feel better. I don't want our lives to be a mess. I want us to enjoy our time together before we bring in another life. I get that, she snapped, but you can't just pretend like this is all going to stay the same forever. Life doesn't just pause for us to be ready. Jenna's voice softened, almost pleading, as she continued. Don't you ever think about what it's going to be like, having a family? A house full of laughter and little feet running around. A life that's full of chaos, yes, but also so much love. Mark's face tightened, and he finally turned to look at her fully, his eyes hardening. I don't want to live in chaos, Jenna. I don't. I don't want to spend my days worrying about diapers and bottles and missing out on everything I love doing. I want us to be free, to go to dinner, to travel, to live without worrying about who's going to babysit. His voice rose with the frustration he felt. Her heart clenched at his words, and she felt the air in the room turn cold. It was the same argument that had come up before, but this time, it felt different. Her mind raced. What had she missed? Was he really this resistant to her dreams? I want a family, Mark. I've been waiting for this moment, for us to decide to take that step. But it's like you've built a wall between us. All this talk about freedom, it's just an excuse. Her voice cracked with the rawness of her emotions, but she didn't care anymore. You keep pushing me away, and all I want is to build a life together. Mark opened his mouth to say something, but the words didn't come. Instead, he stood up abruptly, dropping the remote on the coffee table, his expression unreadable. I can't do this right now, Jenna. I just need some space. He walked out of the room, leaving her sitting alone in the dim light, the sound of the wildlife documentary still playing in the background, but now it felt so distant, so meaningless. Jenna stared at the screen, her heart racing, her thoughts tangled. What had just happened? Why did everything feel like it was slipping through her fingers? She wanted a family, and it seemed like Mark was content with a life without one. She felt a burning desire to have more than just the life they had. But Mark, he didn't seem to want it. Jenna wrapped the blanket tighter around her shoulders, tears threatening to spill. She knew she had to make a choice. But the reality of that choice was too painful to face. The distant sounds of the documentary and the muffled voices of animals on the screen seemed to fade into nothingness as Jenna sat alone in the silence, the weight of their unspoken future pressing down on her. Jenna spent the next few days in a haze, her mind clouded by the conversations she and Mark had had in the living room. It wasn't that she hadn't known this was coming, it had been brewing for months now, but there was something about hearing him so adamant, so cold, that struck her harder than she expected. He didn't just refuse her, he dismissed her desire. He made her feel small, like her dreams weren't worthy of attention. The mornings were the hardest. When the alarm went off and she was forced to leave the warmth of the bed, she found herself staring at the empty space next to her where Mark's form had once been. The bed felt bigger without him, and yet it felt emptier, more hollow. She could barely remember the last time they had woken up together, shared breakfast, or even just talked about something simple and silly. Instead, it was always the same topic now: children, or the lack of them. Mark didn't want them. He had made that perfectly clear. She couldn't help but feel like she was fighting a battle she couldn't win. Every time she brought it up, he'd become defensive, retreating behind his wall of reasons, practical ones, logical ones, selfish ones. He had no time for the chaotic life she dreamed of. He had no place for the children she longed for. It was all so exhausting. Jenna, though, wasn't the kind of woman to simply sit back and let things fall apart. She was determined, perhaps too much so at times. And so, every day, she forced herself to get out of bed and face the world. At work, she was nothing short of professional, smiling, laughing, and doing everything she could to bury the nagging pain in her chest. Her colleagues noticed, of course. They always did when something was off with her. Jenna was an open book in many ways. She wore her emotions on her sleeve, and right now, her sleeve felt heavy with the weight of unshed tears. It was during one of these workdays that Jenna found herself once again facing the uncomfortable reality of her marriage, or, perhaps, the unraveling of it. She was at lunch with Lisa, a close friend and coworker, who had always been a good ear when Jenna needed someone to listen. Lisa had seen Jenna go through all kinds of highs and lows in the past, but even she had noticed how much the tension between Jenna and Mark had grown. "You're still avoiding the conversation, huh?" Lisa asked, her voice gentle but probing. Jenna looked up from her salad, startled by the question. She hadn't realized how much she'd been trying to avoid it herself. "What do you mean?" Lisa raised an eyebrow. "You know what I mean. The kids thing. You two haven't talked about it, have you?" Jenna sighed deeply, letting the air escape from her lungs like a slow, frustrated breath. She hadn't realized how much of herself she had locked away, how much she had buried in order to keep things together with Mark. But Lisa was right. She hadn't talked to him about it. Not really. Not since that last blow-up. Not since the other night, Jenna admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "He just doesn't get it, Lisa. He's so set in his ways. He won't even listen to me anymore." Lisa leaned forward, resting her chin on her hand, her expression sympathetic. "You've been at this for 2 years now. Don't you think you should talk to him again? Like, really talk. Not just bring up strollers and baby names, but what this means for you both. You can't just keep avoiding the subject. It's tearing you apart." Jenna stared down at her half-eaten salad, the fork in her hand still, unmoving. She wanted to agree with Lisa, but something inside her resisted. She didn't know if she had the strength for another conversation like that. She didn't know if she could handle hearing Mark say once more that it wasn't the right time, that they needed to wait. But what if he's right? Jenna asked softly, almost to herself. What if I'm the one who's wrong? What if I'm just being selfish? We've got a good life, Lisa. We don't have to have kids to be happy, right? Lisa shook her head, a small smile tugging at the corner of her lips. Jenna, you're not selfish for wanting a family. That's your heart speaking. You know, you can have all the stability and luxury in the world, but if your heart is yearning for something else, it's not going to be enough. You'll just keep feeling this void. Jenna swallowed hard, her throat tight. She didn't want to admit it, but Lisa was right. She had been feeling that void for months now, and the emptiness inside her seemed to grow with every day that passed. She had tried to ignore it, tried to tell herself that she could be content with just Mark. But she couldn't. Not anymore. Later that night, after another long day at work, Jenna returned home to an almost eerie silence. Mark wasn't home yet, and the quiet of their apartment seemed louder than usual. She kicked off her shoes and dropped her bag on the couch, the weight of the day heavy on her shoulders. As she walked into the kitchen to make herself something to eat, she noticed the framed photo of the two of them on the counter, taken at their wedding, that perfect day when everything felt possible. For a moment, she felt the sting of the woman she had once been, the woman who was so full of hope and excitement for the future, the woman who hadn't yet had her dreams dashed by reality. She missed that version of herself. She missed the woman who was sure that everything would work out, no matter what. As she heated up some leftovers, she found herself pacing around the apartment. Her mind raced, constantly turning over the same thoughts. What if this wasn't the life she was meant to have? What if she was settling, trying to make herself fit into a mold she wasn't meant for? It was a terrifying thought, but it lingered, haunting her. Mark eventually came home, a little later than usual. He walked in, tossed his keys on the counter, and shrugged off his coat. Jenna barely looked at him as she continued to heat the food in the microwave. "Hey, I was thinking," Mark started, his voice sounding tentative, as if unsure how to broach the subject. "Maybe we should consider looking for a vacation spot. Like, something out of the city, you know. A weekend getaway." Jenna glanced at him over her shoulder, her mouth dry. She could feel her chest tighten. "Sure, that sounds nice," she said, trying to keep her tone neutral. "Maybe somewhere quiet. I could use a break." Mark, sensing the tension in her voice, hesitated. "Everything okay? You've been a little distant lately." Jenna put the plate down on the counter with a clatter and turned to face him. There it was again. That question, everything okay? She had heard it so many times before, and each time it felt more like a formality than a genuine inquiry. But now, she couldn't hold it in anymore. The words spilled out before she could stop them. "No, Mark. Everything is not okay. I can't keep pretending that it is," she said, her voice shaking slightly. "We're not okay. Not when you keep shutting me out. Not when we keep avoiding the real conversations that matter." Mark's face fell, and he took a step closer, reaching out to touch her arm. "Jenna, we've been over this. I've told you how I feel. I don't want things to change right now." Her heart twisted painfully. "But that's the problem. You don't want things to change. You don't want what I want. You don't even want to talk about it." She stepped back, feeling the heat of her emotions rising to the surface. "I can't keep living like this, Mark. I can't keep pretending I'm okay when everything inside me is screaming for something more." Mark's jaw tightened, and he let out a long, slow breath. "Jenna, I don't know what you want me to say. I don't know how to make you happy." Jenna's voice cracked as she whispered, "I just want you to want the same things I do." The weekend arrived like a silent relief, a break from the tension that had built up in Jenna's life over the past few weeks. Mark suggested they go for a walk in the park, their usual weekend routine. It had always been their way of unwinding, away from the clutter of everyday life, away from the arguments, the unspoken words, and the growing divide between them. Despite everything, Jenna wasn't ready to give up on those small moments of peace they shared. If nothing else, they had their walks. Maybe, just maybe, this time, things could be different. Maybe they could find a way to reconnect. The weather was perfect, an early autumn afternoon, crisp enough to make the leaves dance on the branches but warm enough for a comfortable walk. The park was quiet, with only a few families scattered around, enjoying the fresh air. Jenna and Mark strolled along the path, side by side but with an invisible distance between them that seemed to grow with each step. Jenna could feel it, like a weight on her chest, but she wasn't sure if Mark even noticed. She kept her eyes ahead, focusing on the scenery, the golden light filtering through the trees, the children running in the distance, the sound of the wind rustling through the leaves. Mark's voice broke the silence first, casual and hesitant. Maybe we could look at some new places, you know. A cabin upstate or something, to get away for a weekend. Jenna glanced at him, her gaze flicking to his face for a second before looking away again. You've been saying that for a while now. We keep putting things off, don't we? Not putting things off, just. Mark paused, trying to find the right words. We just need a little more time. I don't want to rush into anything. You're pushing so hard, and I'm not sure I'm ready for all of it yet. Jenna felt the familiar sting of frustration in her chest. There it was again, the same old excuse. He wasn't ready. He wasn't ready for children, for the life they had talked about, for the future she envisioned. He wasn't ready for any of it. She felt like she had been hearing that same line over and over, and it wasn't enough anymore. It wasn't enough to keep her calm, to keep her from feeling the loneliness that came from being in a marriage where she wasn't seen. She wasn't being unreasonable. She wasn't being a child. She just wanted a life that felt whole, one that had the promise of the future she dreamed of. Mark, she said, her voice soft but firm, we can't just keep saying we're not ready. You keep telling me that, but it feels like we're stuck in neutral. What about our future? What about the family we talked about before? Mark stopped walking and turned to face her. He had that same look again, the one she had come to recognize over the past few months. It was a mixture of confusion and frustration, like he was constantly trying to figure out how to fit into the life she wanted and the one he had already planned. I don't think you understand, he said, his voice tight. It's not that I don't want a family. I just think we need more time to enjoy our lives. To enjoy just being us. There's nothing wrong with that. Jenna shook her head. It's not enough for me anymore, Mark. I need more than this. I've been waiting for this, for us to be on the same page. But we're not. And I feel like I'm running out of time. She turned away, her feet carrying her forward, the words already spilling out before she could stop them. I feel like I'm invisible to you sometimes. Like you don't even hear me. Don't you get it? I want more than this. I want to have a family with you. I want children. I want a house full of noise and mess and joy. I don't want to live in this bubble forever. Mark's face darkened, and he took a step toward her, his voice rising now. And what if that's not what I want? What if I don't want to live in chaos? I want stability, Jenna. I don't want my life turned upside down. It's not about you. It's about what I'm ready for. The words hit her like a slap in the face. She stopped in her tracks, her heart pounding in her chest, a mix of hurt and anger surging within her. She had heard him say it before, but this time, it felt like something inside her snapped. She had been patient, she had tried to understand, but now it felt like everything she had wanted was being dismissed as a passing whim. As if it didn't matter. Maybe I don't want stability, she shot back, her voice trembling. Maybe I want a life that's not so perfect, a life that's messy and real. Maybe I want to wake up every day knowing that I'm building something with you. But you don't seem to care about that. All you care about is what's comfortable, what's easy. Well, life's not easy, Mark. The tension between them was palpable now. Jenna's breath was shallow, her pulse quick, but she didn't care. She couldn't hold it in anymore. Maybe you're right, Mark said, his words cutting through the air. Maybe I don't want the same things you do. But it doesn't mean I don't care about you. It just means that we have different ideas about what happiness looks like. I'm not going to apologize for that. Jenna's chest tightened with a sharp ache, a mixture of betrayal and despair flooding through her. She wanted to scream, to shout at him, to make him understand how deeply she felt. But instead, she just turned away from him, her hands clenched into fists at her sides. I don't want to keep fighting, she said, her voice low and brittle. I don't want to feel like I'm begging you for something I can't have. Mark watched her, his own eyes narrowing with frustration. He wanted to reach out, to say something that would fix this, but the words didn't come. The truth was, he wasn't sure if he could fix this. He wasn't sure if he even wanted to. They walked in silence after that, the space between them growing with every step, like the miles they had been drifting apart for so long had finally caught up with them. Jenna could feel the weight of her own heartache, the realization that they were slipping further and further away from each other. The idea of what their life could be was slipping from her grasp. As they neared the park's exit, they passed a young family sitting on a bench. The mother was feeding breadcrumbs to a couple of pigeons, while the father leaned down, laughing, as their toddler daughter chased the birds around. The sight of them, so happy, so complete, sent a pang of longing through Jenna's chest. She stopped for a moment, watching the little girl run, her high-pitched giggle echoing in the air. Jenna didn't realize it, but a tear slid down her cheek. It was everything she wanted. It was everything Mark had denied her. As they walked past the family, Jenna felt a sudden, sharp pull in her chest. It was the feeling of losing something, of never being able to have it. The feeling of watching someone else live the life you wanted but could never have. Mark noticed the tear and stopped beside her. Jenna. He began, but his voice trailed off as he saw the expression on her face. It was a look of pain, deep and raw, and it made him realize, for the first time, just how far apart they had become. Let's go home, she said softly, not looking at him. She didn't need to say more. He knew what she meant. They didn't speak again as they left the park. The walk they had hoped would bring them closer only seemed to distance them further. The distance between them now felt unbearable, like an insurmountable wall that neither of them could break down. The days that followed that walk in the park were a blur for Jenna. She felt as if she was walking through her life in a fog, a haze of confusion and uncertainty. Mark's words, their argument, the raw emotions, everything weighed on her like an unrelenting storm. Each day seemed to stretch on forever, the tension between them thickening with every passing hour. At work, she threw herself into her tasks, trying to block out the thoughts swirling in her mind. But no matter how busy she kept herself, there was always a quiet moment in the back of her mind when the truth would hit her again, sharp and relentless. She didn't know how much longer she could live like this. How much longer she could endure the constant pull between what she wanted and what Mark wanted. It wasn't that she didn't love him, she did, deeply. But she couldn't ignore the fact that they seemed to be moving in opposite directions. She wanted a family, a future filled with children and laughter. Mark wanted stability, his own vision of a quiet life, and the more she tried to push for something different, the more he seemed to pull away. It was on a particularly quiet Wednesday evening when things came to a head. The apartment was silent when Jenna came home from work, the light from the kitchen casting a soft glow across the room. Mark's coat was still hanging on the back of the door, his shoes neatly lined up by the hallway. But he wasn't home. She glanced at the clock, he should have been there by now. Her heart sank as the familiar sense of unease began to settle over her. She couldn't explain it, but she felt like something was wrong. something bigger than just their ongoing disagreement. She put her purse down and moved toward the kitchen, opening the fridge and grabbing a bottle of wine. It wasn't that she wanted to drink away her problems, but the wine gave her a sense of quiet solace. She poured herself a glass, the deep red liquid swishing gently in the glass. She stared at it for a moment, wondering how much longer she could keep pretending everything was fine. She had been keeping up the facade for so long now, smiling at work, laughing with friends, going through the motions with Mark. But it was becoming harder to keep pretending. As she took a sip of wine, her phone buzzed in her pocket, pulling her from her thoughts. She pulled it out and saw a message from Mark, just 3 words, "We need to talk." Her stomach twisted at the simplicity of it. She knew what those words meant. She had been waiting for this moment, for the inevitable confrontation that would come after weeks of avoiding the truth. But even knowing it was coming didn't prepare her for how much it hurt. She stared at the message for a moment, her fingers hovering over the keyboard. She wanted to respond, to ask what it was about, to try and salvage some control over the situation. But instead, she just put the phone down and took another sip of wine. She didn't want to do this. She didn't want to have that conversation again, where they argued about children, about futures, about how they could never seem to agree. But she knew they couldn't keep avoiding it. Not anymore. The door opened then, and Mark walked in, his face tight, his eyes avoiding hers. She could tell from the way he held himself that something was wrong. His posture was rigid, his usual confident gait replaced by a heaviness that seemed to weigh him down. "Jenna," he said, his voice hoarse, as if he had been preparing for this moment for hours. "We need to talk. Now." Jenna set her wine glass down on the counter and turned to face him, her breath caught in her throat. The atmosphere in the room had shifted. He wasn't just asking for a conversation anymore, he was demanding it. She could feel the weight of it pressing down on her, threatening to suffocate her. "Okay," she said quietly, trying to keep her voice steady. "What's this about, Mark?" He took a deep breath, running a hand through his hair before walking toward her. "I've been thinking about everything. About us. And I've realized something." Jenna's pulse quickened, her heart pounding in her chest. She already knew what he was going to say, but she couldn't bring herself to speak it out loud. She just stood there, waiting. "We're not the same, Jenna," Mark continued, his voice softer now but still filled with that underlying tension. "We don't want the same things anymore. I've tried, I really have. But I can't keep pretending. I can't keep promising you things I'm not ready for." Jenna's breath hitched as the words settled into her chest like ice. She had known it was coming, but hearing him say it out loud still felt like a punch to the gut. Her stomach churned with nausea, and her hands trembled slightly at her sides. She wanted to argue, to fight back, to somehow make him understand. But she could already see it in his eyes, the resignation. The finality. "Mark," she whispered, taking a step toward him. "Please don't do this. We've been together for years. I love you. We can work through this. We can figure it out." Mark shook his head, looking away. "I don't think we can. I can't keep giving you false hope. I've been holding on because I didn't want to hurt you, but I've realized I'm not the one who's going to make you happy. Not like this. Not with the life I want." Jenna felt her throat close up, her mind racing as she tried to process his words. She had known for a while that they were drifting apart, that their visions for the future were so different. But hearing him admit it, seeing the pain in his eyes as he spoke, made it all feel so much more real. It was happening. It was happening right in front of her, and she couldn't stop it. Tears welled up in her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. She wasn't going to beg him. Not now. Not after everything. So, that's it. We're just done. Mark closed his eyes, a pained expression crossing his face. I never wanted this, Jenna. But I can't keep pretending to be something I'm not. I can't keep living a life that isn't mine. Jenna swallowed the lump in her throat, her hands shaking as she clenched them into fists. What does that even mean, Mark? You're just walking away from everything we've built. From me? I'm not walking away from you, he said softly. But I can't stay here, pretending I'm someone I'm not. You want a family. You want kids, and I don't. I can't give you that. And you deserve someone who can. Jenna shook her head, unable to process the finality in his words. She had tried to hold on to the hope, to believe that somehow, they could still work it out. But the reality was too harsh. Too real. There was no middle ground anymore. Are you saying, you're leaving? She asked, her voice breaking despite her best efforts to remain composed. Mark nodded slowly, his face pained. I think we both know that's the only option left. I'm sorry, Jenna. I really am. She stood there for a long moment, the weight of his words sinking in, drowning her in a sea of emotion she couldn't escape. She wanted to scream, to lash out, to tell him that this wasn't fair, that he couldn't just walk away like this. But she knew, deep down, that it wasn't just his decision anymore. She had been fighting for something that was never going to happen, and it had cost her more than she realized. You don't have to go, she whispered, but the words felt hollow, even to her. You don't have to leave. Mark gave her one last, lingering look, his eyes filled with a sadness she had never seen before. I have to, Jenna. I can't keep pretending. I'm sorry. With that, he turned and walked out of the apartment, leaving Jenna standing in the middle of the living room, her heart breaking as the door clicked shut behind him. The silence that followed was deafening. Jenna collapsed onto the couch, her mind racing, her heart shattering. This was the end. There was no going back from this. They were done. And no matter how much she wanted to deny it, she knew it. The pain, the grief, the betrayal, she had never felt anything so raw in her life. But in the silence, something else began to settle over her, a quiet, unsettling realization. Maybe Mark was right. Maybe she had been chasing a dream that was never meant to be. And now, she was left to pick up the pieces. Alone. The weeks after Mark left felt like an endless stretch of dark, hollow days for Jenna. She went through the motions of her life, but every action felt robotic, empty. There was no spark in her steps anymore, no light in her eyes. Her home felt foreign to her now, like a place she once knew but had somehow outgrown. The space where Mark's coat used to hang by the door now stood still, the absence of his presence heavy in the air. His absence felt like a void that seeped into every corner of her life. At work, people noticed. They always did when Jenna wasn't herself. Her colleagues, especially Lisa, tried to help, tried to offer distractions or advice, but nothing seemed to break through the wall of grief Jenna had built around herself. Even on her worst days, she had always been able to smile, to mask her emotions with a flicker of humor or a quick joke. But now, even that felt like a lie. She spent her evenings curled up on the couch, numb, trying to distract herself with shows on TV or books that she couldn't really focus on. The television played in the background like a dull hum, nothing more than noise to drown out the quiet ache in her chest. She avoided the mirror, afraid of seeing the woman she had become, the woman who had once dreamed so brightly of a future with Mark, a future that now felt like a fading memory. One rainy Sunday afternoon, Jenna found herself scrolling through her phone aimlessly, as she often did when she had nothing left to distract her. She had long since stopped trying to avoid the loneliness, it had become a constant companion. She checked her email, scrolled through her social media accounts, and then, almost by accident, she came across a post on Facebook from an old acquaintance. At first, it didn't register. Just another post among the hundreds, the kind she would normally ignore. But then something caught her attention. The picture was of Mark, and his smile was unmistakable. He was holding a small child in his arms, a toddler with bright blue eyes and tousled blonde hair. And standing beside him, looking lovingly up at him, was a woman Jenna didn't recognize. For a few moments, Jenna stared at the image, unable to make sense of it. Her heart pounded in her chest as her fingers hovered over the phone's screen. The caption under the photo read, "Family Day at the Lake. So grateful for my little family. #blessed, the words blurred as her mind raced. Family Day. A child. A woman. It took only a few seconds for the truth to hit her with the force of a freight train. Mark had moved on. He was living a life she had never imagined, a life she thought they would build together. Tears filled her eyes before she could stop them. She wiped them away angrily, but they kept coming, a torrent of emotion she couldn't control. She had known, on some level, that he had left her for a reason, that he had chosen his own path over the one they had once planned together. But this felt like a betrayal. It felt like the final blow. Jenna sat back, her body feeling numb as she let the information settle in. She had known that Mark had wanted stability, but this? He had found someone else. He had found the family he wanted, the one that Jenna had dreamed of. And she was no longer a part of it. The raw, visceral pain of it all was almost too much to bear. For hours, she remained frozen on the couch, the images from the post replaying in her mind. She tried to tell herself that she should be happy for him, that he had found happiness, but the jealousy gnawed at her insides. The resentment and the hurt mingled into something dark and bitter. How had everything turned so upside down? She couldn't bring herself to call Mark, to confront him about what she had seen. The truth was already clear, and confronting him wouldn't change it. He had moved on. She was the one left behind. There was nothing left to say. That night, as she lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, Jenna realized she had been clinging to a dream, to a future that no longer existed. She had spent months, maybe even years, wishing for something she couldn't have. She had wanted the life they had promised, the family they had talked about so many times. But in the end, it wasn't meant to be. For the first time since Mark had left, Jenna felt a quiet shift in her heart. It was small, almost imperceptible, but it was there. The pain was still there, the betrayal still stung, but she could feel the first stirrings of something else, something she hadn't allowed herself to feel before. She could feel the pull toward letting go, toward accepting that her life had taken a different turn. The next few weeks passed in a blur of daily routines and quiet moments of reflection. Jenna began to shift her focus away from the past and toward the future, a future she had never imagined but one that she would have to build on her own. She didn't know where it would lead, but for the first time, she felt a spark of hope. She started going to therapy, something she had never considered before. She realized that she had been carrying around too much emotional baggage, too many broken pieces of her past that needed to be addressed. It wasn't easy, and there were times when she wanted to give up, when the weight of everything seemed too heavy. But each session brought her a little closer to understanding herself, to understanding the choices she had made and the ones she needed to make moving forward. One evening, after a particularly challenging therapy session, Jenna decided to take a walk in the park. It had become one of her favorite ways to clear her mind, to reconnect with herself. As she walked through the familiar paths, she felt the cool evening air wash over her, and for the first time in months, she felt like herself again. She wasn't the woman who had been left behind by a man who no longer wanted her. She wasn't the woman who had tried so desperately to hold on to a dream. She was something else now, someone who had endured, someone who had learned, someone who could stand on her own. As she walked past the same bench where she had seen the family all those weeks ago, she didn't feel the same pang of jealousy anymore. Instead, she felt a strange sense of peace, a quiet acceptance. Mark had his life. And now, it was time for her to build hers. Weeks turned into months, and Jenna slowly began to rebuild her life. She found new hobbies, reconnected with friends, and spent time exploring the world on her own terms. She didn't have the family she had once dreamed of, but she realized that her life could still be rich, full, and meaningful without it. She learned that happiness wasn't something that could be built around another person's vision of the future. It was something she had to create for herself. Then, one rainy Saturday afternoon, while scrolling through social media, Jenna stumbled upon another post. This time, it wasn't about Mark or the new family he had built. It was from one of her friends, a photo of Jenna from a party they had attended together. Jenna smiled at the picture, feeling a warmth spread through her chest. She looked different now, more confident, more whole. The caption read, "Here's to new beginnings, to finding happiness in the places we least expect it." #new chapter. Jenna smiled softly to herself. She had no idea what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, she felt ready to embrace it, whatever it might bring. She wasn't the woman she had once been, the woman who had lived in the shadow of a dream. She was someone new. Someone stronger. Someone who had learned to find peace, not in the future, but in the present. And that, Jenna realized, was enough.